We are here with Jean-Philippe de Tender, who is the Deputy Director General and Media Director of the European Broadcasting Union. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to have you in Malmö this year again.
One of the big stories this year is that the contest is happening against the backdrop of the war in Gaza and calls for Israel to be kicked out of Eurovision and or the EBU.
We do understand that a lot of people have deeply held views on what is happening in the Middle East. And I think everybody, me included, we cannot stay untouched by what is happening. But as you know, the Eurovision Song Contest, which exists for almost 70 years now, has always been the competition between these public broadcasters and the talent they have. It's not a competition between governments.
The pushback to that answer is twofold. One, there is a flag parade at the beginning, and these artists are not holding the flags of their public broadcasters. And secondly, in drawing the difference between Khan and the Russian public broadcaster, there's a little bit of a feeling that, the Russian public broadcaster was spreading misinformation years before 2022. And it seems like the decision in February 2022 was more of a direct response to the actions of the Russian government.
Sure. And I fully understand that a comparison is made with 2022 when Russia was suspended from the Eurovision Song Contest. There was a broad consensus amongst the membership to suspend them. But it's very important to add as well that almost at the same time, the EBU governing bodies also decided that the 3 Russian public service broadcast members were in breach with the member obligations, which means that independent reporting, respecting the values as such. So a procedure started to exclude them shortly afterwards. That's not the case for Khan. Khan fully operates as an independent public broadcaster. But we do understand that within the backdrop of what is happening geopolitically, that people do reflect about what is happening. We will see a number of demonstrations this week in Malmö taking place. That means we advocate for freedom of speech, but we need to steer away from politics in the music event, which is a competition in between talented artists who potentially stand at the beginning of their career.
The pushback that the EBU had against Israel's entry was the lyrics of the song. Can you give our listeners a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look at what the internal discussions at the EBU were as October Rain eventually became Hurricane?
So there are competition rules. I think the most important one is that none of the lyrics, none of the acts can pass a political message or can instrumentalize the act or the performance. What we do is that we give all of the public broadcasts an opportunity to consult before they officially hand in the lyrics, which means that literally tens, sometimes hundreds of songs need to be scrutinized because some of the countries have pre-selections. They have up to 10 candidates, even more. So some want to be sure and hand in all of the lyrics. That is a process which we do in a confidential way. So we don't communicate about such a consultation as such. And then at the beginning of March, the broadcasters need to officially hand in the song. In the case that for any of the broadcasters, we would come to the conclusion that it was not with what the actual rules are, then they still have a chance to either change the lyrics or to hand in a different song. If you recall, perhaps, the same happened with Belarus. Belarus handed in a song officially. The EBU concluded that it was not in line with the competition rules. We offered them to have a second chance and to change the lyrics or to bring in another song, which they didn't want to do, which meant that automatically they excluded themselves from participating.
Can I ask you actually a factual question about that? Because sort of disentangling Eurovision and the EBU, I think, can be a little bit difficult for people. And the case of Belarus had sort of 2 things going on at the same time, right? They essentially pulled out of the competition because 2 of their songs were rejected. Well, a few months later, their broadcaster was kicked out of the EBU.
Yeah, correct. For the same reason, because they were not operating independently from their governments. So which means that we do not fully consider them to be a public service media broadcaster.
In drawing the difference between a government and a public broadcaster, people will point to the fact that, Yugoslavia was one of the only Eastern Bloc countries that during the Soviet Union was in Eurovision. And people will say that's because of the politics of its government, and its government was not aligned with the Soviets. Then, obviously Milosevic gets sanctioned by the UN, and then Eurovision gets on board with what the UN is doing and says, no, you're no longer in the contest. And then when it's Serbia and Montenegro, the country is allowed back in. So I guess how does that fit with the rubric that then you've applied to Russia, Belarus, and Israel in deciding when a country can be in the EBU?
I think Yugoslavia is a very good example of how you see the history of Europe being reflected in the Eurovision Song Contest, and how when new nations arise within Europe and are recognized as countries, then they can potentially participate in the song contest.
Yeah, Eurovision, it was founded in the aftermath of World War II, a very divided Europe trying to stitch itself back together. Skipping ahead to the 90s and 2000s, where Europe felt like everyone was on the same page on broad underlying values. You look at how Turkey pulled out and you look at how Hungary pulled out. Do you see the EBU and Eurovision as navigating a very different world? And how do you think the contest and then your organization should respond to that?
What happened, I think, in the last 10, 15 years is that it has become much more value driven. It is diversity and inclusion. I don't know of any other such a big event like the Eurovision Song Contest, which had the first trans woman, being the one who wins the Eurovision Song Contest. We see young audiences growing substantially and engaging with the brand through social media, having a big impact on the vote. If you see groups like Maneskin winning for Italy, it is definitely these youngsters that are voting that define the outcome of the Eurovision Song Contest, which is great. And although we all watch at it and we see this biggest show on earth, I think people sense intuitively also what it stands for in terms of unifying, which may mean that some countries may potentially not want to participate because they don't stand for these values.
And so I think that this is part of what's core to the Eurovision philosophy is this difference between values and politics, right? Because I do think people look at it sometimes and they go, okay, so you have Marry Me, right, in 2011, at a time when gay marriage, it was politically on the ballot in a lot of places, is heavily contested. That happens on the Eurovision stage. And then you have, someone like Salvador Sobral getting pushback for the SOS refugee shirt. Marry Me was about values and Salvador Sobral's t-shirt was about politics. How do you make that differentiation?
It's a call you have to make case by case. And it's not only what is happening on stage, but what is happening geopolitically as well. This event, which has such a broad audience, doesn't need any political messaging as such. And I agree it becomes more complicated to manage this, but it's also because the impact of the Eurovision Song Contest.
And following on, from the idea of values versus politics, the flag rule has been controversial several times and it's been covered a lot in the media now in the last few days as well. So can you talk about the flag rule and its origins? And why the gay pride flag has been allowed and not the Palestinian flag?
We have what we call a flag policy, which says that all of the participating broadcasters or the countries can have their flag and the rainbow flag as well. The rainbow flag, we have been embraced by the LGBTQI plus, community. They have built this event. They are proud of this event. And the rainbow flag has become almost iconic and symbolic.
Obviously, there are many politicians, including in countries that have participated in Eurovision, who would argue that the rainbow flag is political.
For me and for the EBU, the rainbow flag is not a political flag. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are very important for the EBU as an organization, but also for its members. So everybody needs to be represented on screen. So that is one role we have as media to influence that and to show the diversity of society. If some countries consider the rainbow flag to be political, then let them not participate.
One issue, though, is that, when Martin Osterdahl has talked about this, he says, we're apolitical, but one of the underlying values is basic democracy. With Russia out of the contest, with Belarus out of the contest, there is the controversy over Israel. Then there's also Azerbaijan, whose public broadcaster also is not seen as entirely independent from the government. So how do you think about the case of Azerbaijan, and how do you think about Israel's occupation of the West Bank as being against one of those fundamental basic values of Eurovision?
In general, we know that some broadcasters are under pressure. We see more populist movements who want to have a firmer grab upon media organizations. So the role of the EBU outside of the Eurovision Song Contest as well is to lobby and to advocate towards governments, towards politicians, to keep a strong, independent public service media broadcaster.
So are you behind the scenes pushing the Azerbaijani broadcaster to improve its reporting?
I'm speaking in general. When we talk with politicians and turning to influence, and that is the silent advocate role that the EBU has to play.
There's been a lot of talk about the security situation here in Malmö. Can you talk about how the EBU has coordinated with the city of Malmö to prepare for this huge event with so many eyes on it, with everything going on?
Heavy security is not new. If you look at any big event that's being organized across Europe, then you have to organize your security. So the measures we have taken this year are no different than the measure we've taken last year in Liverpool or the years before. We have basically a year to prepare for the event, and security is one of the most important aspects. We have close collaboration in this case with the city of Malmö, Malmö Arena, with the police of Sweden, with the law enforcement authorities, to ensure, that this is a safe event, for everybody to participate.
Speaking specifically just off of that, on the turquoise carpet, I think a lot of people noticed that it was scaled down in terms of the invite list and stuff like that. Were those security decisions?
We look at each event in particular. When you come to the arena, you're in like an airport bubble with those securities. In case of the turquoise carpet, with the police, the measures were taken that would ensure that we had an excellent turquoise carpet.
All right. Jean-Philippe de Tender, thank you so much for talking to us.
And enjoy the Eurovision Song Contest.
Oh, absolutely will. Thank you.
All the mysteries of the Euroverse.